Hello, welcome to the Art and Science of the Job interview. We're just waiting for a couple people to get all the way in, and then we will get started. So welcome to UCSC Silicon Valley Extension's Career Services Workshops. UCSC Silicon Valley Extension is your UC in Silicon Valley. We offer professional development courses and certificate programs and specializations for you to update your skills for today's job market, and we are the leading workforce educator in Silicon Valley. Our courses are designed by experienced instructors who are actually working in their field. We serve new college graduates needing practical skills, people in the workforce looking to update skills or change direction, and lifelong learners interested in studying with industry experts here in the heart of Silicon Valley. My name is Nisa Dorigo, and I am the Manager of Student Success and Affairs. And today's topic is all about the art and science of the job interview. I'm happy to announce our wonderful presenter today, Jenn Smith, a career coach and consultant for Flourish Careers. Jenn is a former HR and talent leader whose experience spans 15 plus years across multiple Fortune 200 organizations. Now, as a career coach and consultant, Jenn is on a mission to support heart-based and career-minded professionals to navigate the changing world of work by resetting boundaries and igniting action to live their happiest, healthiest lives. And before I hand it over to Jenn, we ask that any questions that you have during the presentation to submit to the chat, and then we will go over as many as we can after the presentation. And if we do not get to your question, don't worry, we can follow up with you after. And if there are any questions that you think of after the workshop is completed, please feel free to email us at extension@ucsc.edu, and we will forward the questions over to Jennifer. Thank you so much. And Jenn, you can take it away.
Excellent, Nisa. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today to talk about one of my favorite ways to support job seekers, which is through interview prep. Housekeeping before we get started, as Nisa mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat and we will have time to cover them at the end. And then second, I have a download guidebook that accompanies this presentation, and you can go ahead and grab that through the chat. I think the link is in there now. Okay, so before we dive into the content, I thought I'd share a bit more about my background. And one of the reasons I love this work so much is particularly tied to one of my own personal experiences early in my career. So quick story, my first job post-college graduation was with Frito-Lay, which is part of PepsiCo. They are a fantastic organization. Some of the best leaders I worked with to this day in my career are from my time at Pepsi and Frito-Lay. Although I will say at the time when I started with them, their hiring and onboarding process was more like what not to do. And so this particular story, this particular job I was interviewing for was for a frontline supervisor in a manufacturing facility in Binghamton, New York. So I'm from Buffalo, which is about 3.5 hours away from Binghamton. And just like most phone interviews, this interview process started with a phone screen. And I'll never forget it. I was in the house I grew up in, eagerly waiting for the phone to ring. And the phone rang right at our scheduled time, and there was a gentleman on the other end. And before, there was no hello, there was no how are you. The very first thing that he said after I said hello was, you know, the sun never shines in Binghamton. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a really interesting way to start a phone screen. And of course, I was super intimidated. And my first response was, well, the sun never shines in Buffalo either. So something got me through that phone screen. Maybe that was his way of breaking the ice. I'm not sure. But for me, it felt really nerve-wracking and intimidating. So I made it through the phone screen and then was invited on site for an all-day interview process. And I call this the survivor-like interview. So there was 15 of us from all over the country, all recent graduates from all over the country. And the interview started at 8 a.m. with a presentation about results. I'll never forget this gentleman in the front of the room practically screaming at us about how we had to get results. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to even do this, let alone get good results. So it started off, again, really just kind of nerve-wracking. And then after that, we all went into this round robin. So like everyone did a one-on-one interview with a different leader from that facility. And so on our own. And then we all would come back to the hospitality room in between interviews. And I noticed every time I came back to the hospitality room, there was less and less coats and people's stuff. And I was like, maybe they're just going to a different room or something. I'm not sure. So then at lunchtime, we came back and there was about half of us in the room at lunchtime. And they broke us up into groups. They interviewed us over lunch, asking about different scenarios and what we would do in different leadership positions. And then after lunch, we went back into our round robins. And by the end of the day, when I came back to the interview room or the hospitality room, there was 2 of us left. So they literally sent people home throughout the day and they were voted, quote unquote, voted off the island. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I get this offer after this entire day of interviewing, I have to take it. Little did I know the 2 jobs they had available. One was for the graveyard shift as the potato chip team supervisor, which is 11 at night to 7 in the morning. The second one was weekend sanitation. So I felt I was lucky because I got the overnight potato chip team. My buddy got weekend sanitation. I don't know, which is better in that case. So then it was time to move to Binghamton. Binghamton is a lovely place. Although at the time, they did not have many options for housing for recent graduates. So I tried to find an apartment. I couldn't find one. So finally I had to get a realtor. I got a realtor. Her name was Betty. Bless her heart. She helped me find an apartment. But the apartment wasn't going to be ready for my first day on the job. And as a recent graduate, I did not have money to stay in a hotel. And so Betty offered me to stay in her spare bedroom until my apartment was ready. And this was before Airbnb was a thing. And I'm pretty introverted. So this was super uncomfortable, especially for a recent graduate moving 3.5 hours from home. It was a rough start to my professional career. And so I always say that from this survivor-like interview to the process of not having any corporate housing to having to live with my realtor throughout my first week, that I vowed to make the hiring experience more welcoming for job seekers if I was ever provided the chance. And as luck would have it, that opportunity presented itself over and over again throughout my career. So I spent 15 years in corporate America at Fortune 200 organizations. I moved from PepsiCo to Ingram Micro, which is a tech distribution company, to Thermo Fisher Scientific, which is a biotech company. I switched from operations into HR, supported the entire supply chain. In my last role, I led a recruiting team for Thermo Fisher Scientific. And in that role, it was really eye-opening to me how much help folks needed with job searching and interviewing and resumes and all things career. And so I decided in 2017 to get my career coaching certification, started doing this work as a side hustle, loved it so much. And so in 2019, I hit publish on the Flourish Careers website, and I've been doing this work ever since. And I feel really lucky to be in a place to support job seekers from having all of that previous HR experience and my own personal experiences of changing jobs a couple different times. So when I'm not working, I love getting outside and exploring all Western New York has to offer. So you can see my dog in this picture. Her name is Tula. We love just getting out and navigating the local parks. She's a 128-pound Newfoundland. She's a true gentle giant in all sense of the term. Okay, so my objective today is to provide you with 3 lessons to ace your next interview with poise and purpose. So what I've learned from interviewing thousands of people throughout my career at this point is that interviewing is an insider job. It's a combination of your mindset, which is the art, and the strategy, which is the science. And I know the experience of interviewing can be intimidating. It can be super awkward. But if you take the time to prep both your mindset and your strategy, the experience can be much less intimidating and maybe even enjoyable. So for today, I want you to recognize that interviewing is a combination of mindset and strategy. You're going to learn the different types of interviews and how to prep for each stage. And then I'm going to walk you through how to apply the frameworks we talk about today in your next interview. So in terms of our agenda, we're going to go through 3 stages. We're going to prepare by understanding your goal and the job seeker's goal. We're going to plan by understanding the mechanics of the interviews, the different stages, the types of questions. And I'm going to share some quick tips for virtual interviews because they are here to stay. And then finally, practice. So if you don't take anything away from this presentation, tune in for that last section on practice, perfecting your pitch. I'm going to share with you an elevator pitch formula that can be used throughout your career, not even just when you're interviewing. I actually use it to this day. And then we're going to talk about your responses during the interviews and how to frame your stories. So first, before we jump in, I have a quick question for you guys. So open up your chat box and tell me in the chat if you would rather go to the dentist than to a job interview. So I did this poll on social media and I was really surprised at the response. So tell me if you'd rather go to, Claudia says, absolutely would rather go to the dentist than a job interview. Anybody else, dentist over job interview or job interview over dentist? Dentist, yeah. It's true. So when I did the poll on social media, 91% of people that responded to the poll preferred going to the dentist over the job interview. So yes, dentist. So, and I totally get it. Interviewing is not something most people look forward to, but it is necessary to landing your next best role. Just like going to the dentist is essential to maintaining good health. So let's start by preparing with the goals of an interview. So when you think about interviewing as an employer, they want to know 2 things. So to make this super simple, they want to know 2 things. 1, can you get the job done? So it's an assessment of your skills and knowledge for the job. And then 2, do I like you? Are you a values-based fit for our team? Are you hungry to win? Do you hold yourself accountable? Do you help out? Are you ready to roll your sleeves up and pitch in? There's a number of different ways that employers will assess this, and we'll go through how that happens. But in the grand scheme of things, there's really 2 things that they're looking for. Your goal as a job seeker is simple. It's for your employer to see you as a future colleague. The other piece that I would add on here is that you should also be evaluating the company and the team as much as they're evaluating you. It's kind of like going on a first date. It's an initial meeting between 2 people, and it's really just an effort to get to know each other. So I don't want you to think of an interview as a solo performance with the spotlight on you. It should really be a 2-way conversation and an engaging 2-way conversation. So sometimes that mindset shift can help folks. So step 1 in preparing your mindset is to notice. So what are you telling yourself before an interview? Do you have an inner critic chirping in your ear, or do you have an inner champion chirping in your ear? So this is another quick story. I conducted interview prep with a client, and he immediately kicked off our conversation. I've never met him before. We just were doing interview prep, and he kicked off our conversation by telling me 10 or more reasons why he was a lousy interviewer and he was never going to get the job. That's how he started the conversation. And I said, trust me, if you approach this interview with 10 plus reasons that you're not going to get the job, you're not going to get the job. You have to transform your mindset into a place where you are confident in your skills and abilities for the role. And sometimes it helps to think about your favorite coach or your favorite mentor. So I played softball growing up, and my coach was always there on the sideline cheering me on. So I would get up to bat and he would tell me to knock it out of the park. He's not going to stand over there telling me to strike out or to, hit a foul ball. And so same thing in your own mind, you want your own coach to be cheering you on, not being a critic and telling you you're terrible. So instead of approaching the interview with a mindset that you're going to strike out, try resetting your mindset and approach the conversation like a business conversation. Again, you should be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So that's step 1, resetting from inner critic to inner cheerleader. Now, step 2 in preparing your mindset is to approach the meeting with a service mentality. So you guys can all probably think of a time when you've been on a team and there was an opening. So somebody left, somebody resigned, somebody retired, and there's an opening. Everybody's, trying to fill in for that person. There's a lot of extra work that's on everyone's plate. It causes a lot of stress. So when there's an opening on a team, they want you to come in and solve all their problems and help the team and pick up where that person left off. So approaching it with a service mentality, knowing that you are going to help the team. So how can you make their lives easier? How are you going to support the team and fill that gap for them? Most job seekers I work with tell me that in their career, they want to help people. They want to make an impact. And so what better way to start that than in an interview conversation when you're leading with that service mindset, trying to understand how you can jump in and support the team. The third piece in preparing your mindset is to position yourself as a high value hire from your very initial touch points. So even as you're interacting over email with a recruiter, you can start to position yourself as a high value hire by showcasing excitement, enthusiasm, asking questions, bringing a fresh perspective is all going to aid in helping you conquer that interview. So if you consistently show up and leave the impression that they need you on the team to fill that gap, you will conquer your interview with poise and purpose. And I'll tell you, a lot of times I work with folks, that are setting themselves up for an interview, and the nerves just get the best of them. And it ends up making them come across robotic or just not really interested when they really are interested, but they're just nervous. So calm the nerves, take some deep breaths, smile, and know that you're going to bring your very best to the team. So as a recap for preparing your mindset, your goal is for the employer to see you as a partner. The employer's goal is to assess your skills and abilities for the job. You're going to reset your mindset, which is the art of all of this. And I would even go out on a limb to say that conquering an interview is probably even more 80% mindset than anything else. So reset your mindset by turning your inner critic into an inner champion. Approach the conversation like a business conversation. Evaluate them as much as they're evaluating you. Lead with that service mindset and position yourself as that high value hire throughout the initial touch points. Bring the enthusiasm, bring the fresh and new perspective, and set the intention to bring your best. So that's the art. And now we're going to get into the strategy with the planning phase. So when it comes to planning, having an awareness about the details and the goal of each interview stage is really helpful to best prep and make the most use of your time. Not all interview stages are the same. And so knowing this helps you use your time wisely and strategically. So a lot of times when I work with folks and they get an interview, it's like this tornado and they're like, oh my God, I'm so excited, got an interview. And they start doing all the things. And it's not really a good use of your time when you're doing all the things. So I want to help you kind of break it down as you go through an interview process. So usually there are 3 stages along with a phone screen and a decision phase. So the phone screen is that gatekeeper and you want to take it seriously. A lot of times I work with folks and they're like, oh, I just have a 15-minute call with a recruiter. Well, that 15-minute call with the recruiter is the gatekeeper to say yes or no on whether or not you're going to continue on in the process. So you want to be prepared to answer standard questions in that phone screen about why you applied, what your salary requirements are, your availability to start, some very basic standard questions. After the phone screen, you move on to the first round. This is one step closer, and it's usually a more detailed discussion, typically lasting 45 to 60 minutes. This round is most likely going to be conducted by a hiring manager, otherwise known as your future boss. And so this is a big one. You want to take this one really seriously and dive deep into examples and stories and showcase your technical abilities if you're applying for a technical role. And I'm going to talk to you about the different types of interview questions for this stage in a minute. The second round is the real deal. So this is probably going to be a more in-depth discussion or a series of interviews. usually with a panel of team members, either members of your direct team or adjacent teams that you're going to be working really closely with. And here they're probably going to go into behavioral and situational based questions and really try to get a good understanding of how you would perform the job. The third and final round means you're almost there. At this point, they've narrowed down the candidate pool, probably started with, I would say usually 7. We start usually with 7 candidates and then start to narrow the pool down. So usually by the third round, it's between 2-ish candidates. So at this point, you should have gained an in-depth knowledge about the company, the culture, the team, and have a pretty good decision on whether or not you want to join. Sometimes the third round can be face-to-face. Obviously, we're living through, these circumstances, so it might still be virtual, or it could be face-to-face, and you might have the opportunity to meet even more coworkers during the final round. And then finally, the decision, which is the job offer. And this is usually contingent on a background and drug test. Typically, organizations are going to give a verbal offer first to make sure you're happy with the terms. And then that gives you a chance to negotiate anything that you were hoping for that wasn't in the initial offer. So this is typical. Of course, there could be other things depending on the job. There could be assessments or presentations or case studies or tests, but this is typically the structure of the interviews. So when you do get a phone screen, you don't need to prepare for all the rounds right away. You start with the phone screen and those standard questions and then continue preparing as you go through the process. So in terms of the types of questions, so again, they're not probably going to be the same throughout the process. And I've found it best to share a couple of examples here. So the 3 types that I've seen most in interview processes are standard questions, which are basic requirements for the role. Situational questions are situations you might encounter on the job. And then behavioral based questions are probably the ones you've heard the most of, which is the ones that start with, tell me about a time when, ... And those are hard to answer. And that's why stories are really important. So just real quick here, a couple of examples of each of these. So pretend I was interviewing for a talent acquisition or a recruiting leadership role. If I was doing a standard phone interview, they might ask me questions like, how many years of experience do you have leading recruiting teams? How large were the teams that you recruited? How many hires did you have every year? What locations were those hires? They may ask some soft skills like your greatest strength or your greatest weakness or things like that as well. So you want to be prepared for basic questions. Then when you get into the situational based questions, these are becoming more and more popular. So I've been talking with job seekers and doing interview prep, and these situational questions are more and more popular, even more so than the behavioral based questions. And so these are basically, they would give you a scenario and ask how you would handle it. So again, if I was interviewing for a recruiting manager position, they might say something like, imagine you're leading a 15-person recruiting team and everyone's at max capacity. You are informed that there are going to be 50 new requisitions entered into the applicant tracking system right now for your area. Walk me through your upcoming week, including before, during, and after the requisitions are entered and ready for distribution. So that's a very real situation that a recruiting manager could be placed in, and they want to know how I would handle it. And then the final most common is the behavioral. So describe a time when. So again, if I was recruiting or interviewing for a recruiting manager, they might say something like, tell me about a time when you demonstrated exceptional conflict management skills in a recruiting manager role. So what was the conflict and how did you resolve it? So then I would go back and think of an example and then share that with them, which I'm going to share some examples with you in a second. So again, these are typical. There are lots of other different types of questions or ways to assess talent, but these are the ones that you can certainly prepare for and make sure you have your stories ready for your interview. So in the spirit of preparing, I did want to just take a little detour here and talk about virtual interviews, because virtual interviews are a thing and they will continue to be a thing. And they do require a little bit of more dedicated, specific planning. And so, when I was in corporate, I was doing virtual interviews even before the pandemic. And then obviously with the pandemic, they became a thing. And now I think people realize the efficiencies that are gained with virtual interviews, and it's easier for a lot of pretty much everyone involved, at least in those initial stages. So what I always like to say here is that just because your interview is happening over Zoom or WebEx doesn't mean it's not a real interview. So you want to prepare just like you would for an in-person interview. And the number one question I get with virtual interviews as a career coach, people ask me what to wear for a virtual interview. And so what I would say is dress just like you would for an in-person interview, from head to toe. So I have some horror stories of things where people were wearing, a button-down shirt on top and sweatpants, and the cat came barging in the room and they had to get up and they've got sweatpants on, and it's just not good. So you want to make sure you're dressed for an in-person interview. The other thing too is that I would suggest testing to make sure your outfit looks okay on camera. Some colors are super washed out. Certain styles might not work depending on the frame of the camera. So I always suggest hopping on camera with a friend or, whoever, just to make sure everything is looking the way that it should. And then you definitely want to test your setup. One of the key things with your setup is your lighting. And so I'll never forget this. I was working with somebody and we hopped on Zoom 24 hours before her interview. It was a 4 p.m. interview. And when we hopped on Zoom, the lighting that was coming through her room and the curtains or whatever she had in there was like striping. You know how light can stripe across your face? So I was doing that and it was super distracting. I couldn't even see her. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we did this, because you need sheets or something. Got to put something up around your room so the light coming in at this time of day doesn't cause a distraction for your interview. So you definitely want to make sure you test your situation at the time of day that you're going to be interviewing. I think, obviously testing your tech is a big piece of this. So make sure you download the platform ahead of time, make sure it works on your computer, you've got the most upgraded version, all of those things. The other thing too is with virtual interviews is obviously you want to minimize disruptions and be in a quiet place. But if there is a chance you're going to be interrupted by something outside your control, it's totally fine to mention that at the start of the conversation. Just let them know. They will think you're proactive by letting them know. So if you have a new puppy or a new baby and the dog might start barking or the baby might start crying, you can just make the interviewer aware that that's a possibility. And it just shows that you're human. And it also helps alleviate some of the nerves on your end, thinking like, what if something happens? The last kind of tip here is optimal eye contact. Trust me, I know how weird it is to talk to a webcam or your laptop screen. I have seen everything. I've seen people looking to the side. I've seen people looking down. I've seen people looking up. I've seen go like literally up people's noses, like all the things. Like, so please make sure you know where the eye contact is for the conversation, even if you have to put a little Post-it note with a face or something, just to make sure that you know where the eye contact is and you are providing optimal eye contact throughout the conversation. One thing around the tech too is this is kind of a pro tip that folks used to do when I was interviewing that I always thought was really smart, is if you're nervous about the tech not working, it's always a good idea to ask your point of contact for a phone number of somebody that you can get in touch with. So if you're interviewing with, say, the hiring manager and then the HR manager, at least try to get a contact information for folks just in case the tech doesn't work or something freezes or whatever it is. So that shows that you're super proactive and thinking about things before they happen. And again, it also can calm your nerves as you go into the conversation, knowing you have a plan B if something breaks down. In terms of showing up, people always ask me this too. For in-person interviews, 10 minutes early. For virtual interviews, just a couple minutes. You could do like 3 to 5 minutes early to make sure everything's working. And that gives you enough time just to kind of troubleshoot if you have to. So those are the virtual interview top tips. And now we've got a quick pop quiz. So who was paying attention? First question, real quick in the chat, true or false? These are easy, true or false questions. First question, you don't need to plan for a phone screen. True or false? False. Awesome. Christian is on it. Elijah, false. False, false, false. The phone screen is the gatekeeper. You need to plan for the phone screen. Even if it's just a 15-minute call, make sure you're at least have some of those standard questions under your belt. Okay, second question, true or false? A behavioral-based interview question typically starts with, tell me about a time when. True or false? Behavioral-based, tell me about a time when. Anybody? It's not a trick question. Everyone's too nervous on this one. True. Behavioral-based questions start with, tell me about a time when. And this is based on the notion that your past experience is an indicator of your future performance. I'm going to give you some examples of that in a second. Last question. True or false? It's a good idea to wear sweatpants during a virtual interview. You want to be comfortable, but you don't want to wear sweatpants during a virtual interview. You want to dress the same as you would for an in-person interview. I had a client recently tell me that she was doing a virtual interview and she was dressed, and she normally wears like slippers or whatever, in her house. And she said that she put on high heels for her interview, and it changed something in her mind. Like, it made her feel professional and good about her interview. So there is a science behind that. I am not familiar with it, but there's definitely a science behind that about dressing the part as you kind of build your confidence to go into an interview. Okay. So in summary, as we wrap up the plan phase, typically there are 3 rounds of interviews with the phone screen and the decision phase at the end. The types of questions you should plan for are the standard basic questions, situational, which are you're presented with a situation and you're going to be asked what you would do, and then behavioral, which are past performance is an indicator of future performance. Virtual interviews, you want to plan the same way you would as an in-person interview. So now that we've prepared our mindset, we've planned for the different stages of the interview, it's time to talk about the practice. Practice, practice, practice. This is the most important piece of this work. So going back to this notion of presenting yourself as a high value hire, they are hiring you to solve all of their problems. And so how can you bring the impression that you can solve all their problems? First and foremost, you must know what the problems are. Job descriptions will have the answers with 2 caveats. So some job descriptions are not written the best and they can be pretty general, or if you're interviewing via word of mouth and there is no job description. So in those situations, even when there is a job description, it is up to you to do the research and find out what the team needs and what the problems are that you can solve. There's a couple different ways to do this. LinkedIn is a great tool to connect with your interviewers ahead of time to see if you have anything in common. You can see if they're posting anything about what they're looking for in terms of their team. Obviously, you can do the research on the company. You can also follow key leaders on social media. So going through all the social channels, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and start following key leaders and see what's going on with the organization. And then some companies even have handles where they share job specific information. So like Pepsi used to have at PepsiCo jobs. Some companies are like life at Cisco or whatever it is. So you can really start to gather good information just by researching online and using social media channels. And so once you know what they need in this role, then you can more strategically use your time to practice. All right, the tell me about yourself question. This is the dreaded question that so many people get tripped up on. And we know it's going to get asked, yet it still feels so intimidating. And when I interviewed people, I would open with this question because it's an easy opener just to start the conversation. And I'll tell you a quick story. I once, I'll never forget this. I started an interview. It was a 30-minute phone interview. And I started with this question. And the candidate spoke for 25 of the 30 minutes with a complete play-by-play of her entire career history. We had no time for anything else. And so that is what you do not want to do when you get to this phase of the process. And it sometimes can be really hard because it's such an open-ended question. So you want to have a really good structured response for this question. Needless to say, that woman that I just shared did not make it past the gatekeeper in that situation. So you have to come across competent and short and sharp in your responses. The good news is I'm going to share the perfect formula with you right now. Okay, so this is the perfect pitch formula. It is a 3-part formula and quickly showcases who you are, what you do, and what you're looking for. So if somebody says, tell me about yourself, you can respond in this 3-part formula. And I'm going to walk you through it real quick. So who you are is your why, and it should be related to the company, the role, or the industry that you're interviewing for. And I like to start with either I believe or I love. And the reason for that is because it's super attention grabbing. And your listener is going to grab their attention immediately and they're in. And then you follow that up with what you do, which is your top transferable skills. So this is where you can start by sharing more about your current role, or if you're making a career change, highlight those transferable skills and what you specialize in. And then thirdly is what you're looking for. And so obviously this is going to change depending on the role or the company that you're interviewing with. But 3-part formula, and I'm going to give you an example really quick. And this is for a career changer. So this is from a client, Jacob. Jacob was working in the food and beverage manufacturing industry, and he wanted to move into the outdoor recreation industry as a team leader. So he was a quality control lead in food and beverage manufacturing and wanted to move into outdoor recreation as a team leader. So this was his 3-part formula. So he starts with who he is. So it started with, I believe people, especially children, spend too much time outdoors or spend too much time behind a computer screen instead of being outdoors. As a quality control technician, I specialize in making smart and thorough business decisions and leading others through the day-to-day operation. Currently, I'm working on shifting my career into the outdoor recreation industry to support more people in safely and easily spending more time outdoors. So he started with a bold statement about how he believes children spend too much time indoors behind a computer screen instead of outside. He shared his specialties as a quality control technician leader, making smart and thorough business decisions and leading teams through the day-to-day, which is a direct parallel to a team leader role, no matter what type of company you're running. And then what he's looking for. So he wants to make an impact in the outdoor recreation industry. So again, boom, 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 super short, super sharp, and it just showcases your unique value that you bring to the organization. In terms of your interview responses, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make in interviews is talking in generalities instead of storytelling. Storytelling is powerful. It's 22% more memorable than just stating facts. It connects people to each other and it invites a conversation. And I know that there are tons of ways to think about interview stories. There's star stories, there's car stories. My favorite are OAR stories, probably because I like the band, but it's easy for me to remember these 3 phases. So it's the objective, the action you took, and then the result. And practicing your accomplishments in this framework will help you build confidence to articulate them throughout your interview process. So I'm going to share a couple of examples of what this might look like. So let me share a few examples, and I'm going to think about different roles just to kind of give you different perspective for each of these. So going back to our different types of questions, first here is a standard question. What is your greatest strength? This is a super standard question. A lot of people ask this question. So a generic response to this question might be, my greatest strength is my customer service communication skills. So say I was interviewing for a customer service position. A generic response would be just that. My greatest strength is my customer service communication skills. An example story with the OAR format might sound like this. The objective, my greatest strength is my customer service and communication skills. The action. For example, when I worked for a tech company, we were on the verge of losing one of our long-term customers due to some issues with inventory. I happened to be the customer service rep who answered the phone when they were particularly upset with us. I spent 30 minutes on the phone listening to them, getting all their concerns out. From there, one by one, I addressed their concerns and acted immediately on one specific concern that got us a quick win. As a result, ultimately, my ability to listen and effectively communicate a quick win saved us from losing that long-term customer. So you can see the difference in the generic response versus the story response. The story response is so much more memorable, and it really paints the picture for me, if I'm listening to that this person knows what they're doing. They're going to come in and kill it. They're going to come in and solve all of our problems. Another one here. So this is a situational question. So pretend I was interviewing for an administrative assistant role. And this was the question. Every quarter or every year, the HR team gets together for an offsite. What are a few of your next steps to plan the offsite? So as an objective, I might say, I would approach planning an offsite from the perspective of ensuring we have the best alignment of goals for the meeting, as well as cost effectiveness. And then going on to the action, I understand that offsite meetings are a major investment in time and funds. So first, I would understand what's worked in the past, what didn't work in the past. Then I would get all the basics. I would understand what the budget is. I would understand who needs to be there, figure out some potential dates and venues. And then finally, once we know the date, I would get on the phone with the vendors and facilities to plan for the most cost-effective solutions. As a result, the meeting would be a success. And even add a little anecdote here. Recently, I've been getting creative about planning our first ever virtual event in my current position, and it's been a lot of fun. So the idea of helping plan a regular offsite is very exciting. So you can see, again, objective, action, result, and then adding a fresh perspective or a little bit of excitement for doing the work. Third example here is a behavioral-based question. So pretend I was interviewing for, let's say, a manager or director of inventory management, something like that. So describe a time when you were able to create a process to solve a problem. The objective here might be, when I was the inventory manager, I took over a team of 20, and I noticed that the inventory management lacked a process. There was a lot of out of stocks, and sales reps were complaining constantly that we didn't have the products. So the action that I took was, first, I investigated to find out the company was using a pull system and that managers could choose what stock from hundreds of different vendors. And then I looked at the supplier network and ended up narrowing it down to 4 key partners. And we converted from a pull system to a push system, which really standardized the entire inventory process. As a result, our out of stock inventory went from 84% to 95%. The sales team was happy and we had the right product at the right time. So you can see how those stories were super easy to follow. Even if I don't know anything about inventory, it's still a story that I could follow and understand. And a lot of times, especially if you're in the initial stages, if you're talking to a recruiter or HR, they're not going to have a really in-depth understanding of the job. And so you're going to have to walk them through the process. So now that we've talked about interview questions and your responses, let's just touch base on asking good questions in the interview process. So for me as an interviewer, it is such a letdown when I hear the same questions asked over and over, or worse, if I save time at the end of a 30-minute conversation and then someone tells me they don't have any questions. It's such a letdown. So asking good questions will help present you as a high value hire and make you memorable. I've been in thousands of debrief meetings with hiring managers, and comments always bubble up about the types of questions the candidate asks throughout the process. So what I always recommend here is think about who you're meeting with. So if you're meeting with your future manager, ask them about their leadership philosophy. If you're meeting with HR, ask them about their retention strategy. So you can ask really detailed questions based on the function of the person you're interviewing with. Culture questions, get creative. So the question, describe the company culture. it's so boring and it's so easy for me to give you a canned response if I'm the interviewer. So think about what you really want to know and ask that question. So maybe there's a question around like, what do you love and not love about working at this organization? Or how is feedback provided? Like, how am I going to know if I'm doing a good job? Or, what surprised you when you first started about the company? So asking really good questions will give you good information to evaluate whether or not that company is going to be a good fit for you. And it's also going to elevate you in the candidate pool as a high value hire. Prepare your questions ahead of time. It's okay. If you're going on site, bring a whole list on your notebook. It's totally fine. If you've got virtual interviews, have notes with all of your questions and make sure you get them answered. That shows that you prepared ahead of time, and that will also elevate you as a candidate. So in summary, for our practice recap, you want to prepare your pitch and your stories ahead of time. Review the job description, anticipate what kind of problems they have that they're going to ask you about. You want to prepare a list of questions and bring them with you, and practice, practice, practice. Talking your stories out loud makes such a difference. They will know you're nervous when you get into an interview. It's okay, but the practicing ahead of time is going to elevate your confidence and help you present yourself as that high value hire. So your playbook for success and conquering your next interview with poise and purpose is right here. So you want to prepare your mindset, which is the art, and build a strategy, which is the science. You want to plan for each stage of the process and the different types of questions that might get asked. And then you want to practice by perfecting your pitch and talking through your stories. Showcasing energy and enthusiasm is going to position you as the high value hire. Practicing is going to help you feel more confident. And I'll tell you, my favorite interviews are always conversations. They turn into two-way discussions where the candidate is just as excited about the role as I am about hiring for the role. So you should feel confident to present yourself as someone who is going to bring more to the table than they ever imagined. So as we wrap up, in the spirit of accountability, I will leave you with this. What is one tiny thing that you can do today to conquer your next interview with poise and purpose? So maybe that's crafting 3 OAR stories. Maybe that's drafting your pitch. Maybe that's talking your stories out loud to a friend. Maybe it's testing your tech. Whatever it is, think about one tiny thing that you could do to help move forward in your interview process with confidence. So that concludes our framework for today. If you found any of this helpful, I've got 2 things for you. You can grab a copy of the download, which is basically this content. I'll throw that back in the chat there, which is basically the content we covered here. And then also, if you have an upcoming interview and you would like dedicated support, I would love to offer 10% off a 90-minute interview prep session. So usually how I do those is that we talk about the role that you're interviewing for, and then I literally help you hash out your stories and your elevator pitch so you're 100% prepared for your next interview. So with that, I would love to open it up for Q&A or discussion or anything that is on your mind. Put questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody can come off mute or not. I'm not sure how you're set up.
Yeah, either way, someone can come off of mute or they can put them in the chat and I can read them out loud.
I got one.
Awesome.
So first off, thank you for giving this talk. It was really informative.
Sure.
But the main question I have is like actually getting in touch with like figuring out who is doing the interview process. Because in my experience, applying for jobs is usually like you do the online application and then someone who is not usually the recruiter contacts you. And like I've tried asking like to talk to the recruiter and like I haven't been able to, like the interviewer, excuse me. And I've had trouble actually getting that like touching base before an interview. So how would you do that?
So quick clarification there. So just walk me through that. So you apply online, someone reaches out to you for the initial phone screen, and then you're trying to get to the next step, or is it when you apply online and you haven't heard anything?
It's mainly when I apply online and I haven't heard anything, because usually it's like an automated response and I
see.
can't,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's actually kind of before. So that's probably a whole nother webinar on the job search strategy, but you're 100% right. And I will just, I feel like I can say this as a former, talent acquisition leader, that the online system is pretty saturated and pretty broken at this point. And what ends up happening, and this is just kind of like an inside peek, as a recruiter, we open a job and literally within, I don't know, a couple of days, we probably have 100 applicants, depending on the job. We have lots of applicants. And usually what ends up happening, and this is the software that I used to use, is that referrals are going to go to the top of that 100, going to go to the top of that list. And then our companies, the companies I used to work for, had policies that we had to call those referrals before even dipping into the rest of the applicants. And usually if I have 10 referrals, I'm going to find 5 candidates that are going to move forward in the process. So that's happening on the back end of this work. And you guys can probably picture it. So say, you're working on a team and you go to your team meeting and you find out that somebody quit or got fired or resigned or whatever, retiring. Everyone looks at each other and they're like, who do you know? And then everybody knows somebody that might be a good fit for the team. And those are the referrals that are getting through the system on the back end. So a lot of times before the jobs even make it to the big job boards where you're applying, Christian, they already have people in mind. So the whole strategy there is to network. And what I recommend is identifying your top companies that you want to work for and start with peers. So say you were looking for like a marketing specialist type of job. Find your top companies, use LinkedIn to find those peers and start some informational interview conversations just to break the ice and build relationships and get to know people. And then when the jobs do come open, they already know you and they've thought of you and you're ready to kind of slide into one of those jobs. It's not a plug and play, light switch, flip, solution, but it's all about relationship building and trying to get to those roles before they hit the big job boards, or they hit the big job boards and they think of you and tell you to go ahead and apply to get your name in the hat. And you can sometimes even apply with a referral link and you'll go to the top of that pile. So that would be my best recommendation for that. I know it's not perfect. I know the systems are broken, but it's all about relationship building.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. That is a whole nother topic, by the way. Anything else?
Slight follow-up to that.
Sure.
How would you find out, like, because the main thing I'm wondering about is like finding the person who will be interviewing me at the company.
Yeah.
And usually on LinkedIn, it's usually on LinkedIn and like I just can't find it. So how will I know, or what's the strategy for finding that out?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. And usually recruiters get inundated on LinkedIn too. So it's kind of hard to connect with recruiters. That's where I recommend peers in the department. No, maybe not even peers. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but like people that work in the department or the function that you're interested in. So you can just like, I guess like the other piece there is trying to find something you have in common with somebody. So like maybe you see somebody that works in the marketing department for your top company and you guys, went to the same school, or, you noticed that they're, I don't know, Buffalo Bills fan. I'm from Buffalo. So something like that to just kind of like break the ice and start building a relationship with somebody. And so then if you can do that, then you end up having an informational interview, or I like to call them advice chats with somebody, and you can ask the question like, hey, who's the hiring manager for your department or your team, and find out who that is, and then start to, build your relationships that way. It just starts with one connection. So if you can start with one person that you have something slightly in common with, or you could even pay somebody a compliment. That's the other thing that I found really works on LinkedIn for some of my clients is, if they are interested in, let's just say Pepsi, and they notice that the marketing leader is sharing a lot of blog content or, video content or whatever it is, paying a compliment to their work can also break the ice and get you kind of sliding in there as a potential candidate. So you want to just try to break the ice and grab their attention somehow. And then once you get into like an informational interview or an advice chat conversation, those should be super short, but you can always have it on your agenda to say, hey, who else should I meet with? Or do you mind sharing who, the hiring manager is in your department? Or are you going to have any roles coming open? Who's leading the recruiting process? So starting with one connection and then asking those really specific questions to get more information. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot, actually. Thank you. That was really, that was exactly what I was looking for. Shoot.
Awesome. No problem. Thanks for the question. Anything else? I'd love to connect. If anyone's on LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find my website is @flourish.careers. I love this work. I love supporting job seekers. So if you guys need anything, don't ever hesitate to reach out.
All right, great. Well, if anyone thinks of any questions after, I know kind of my mind's always processing and thinking about information, and I come up with questions like an hour or two later. I'm like, oh shoot, that would have been so good. So if you think of anything like that, please email extension@ucsc.edu or reach out directly to Jen. And yeah, thank you so much for attending today.
Awesome. Thank you, Nisa. Thanks, everyone.